Hello everyone! By the time this post publishes, we will already have said goodbye to our temporary pets here in San Miguel, driven 2 days north through 3 Mexican states and crossed back over the US border, where we'll spend a whirlwind few days in Texas getting ready for our flights to Tokyo. But I'll have much more to share on that later, and the topic of today's video is house sit number 10 in beautiful San Miguel de Allende, Guanajuato, Mexico. The location of the house sit in San Miguel Centro has been very nice, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the location later on in the video. The duration of the sit is 1 month, which is just about our preferred time for a house sit. And it was booked via the website House Sit Mexico, and it's one of the few house sits that we actually booked through that site, although I will say that the annual fee for the website was definitely worth it. As with all of our house sits, this was a no-fee compensation, meaning that we trade our time to care for our host's house and pets in exchange for staying in their home with all utilities paid. In this instance, that includes electric, gas, internet, a full kitchen, and a washer and dryer. I will note that a dryer is not always common at house sits in Mexico, so being able to fluff our clothes instead of drying them in the sunshine is a little bit of a luxury. This was one of our best house sits as far as cost, because the time worked out perfectly with our previous house sit number 9 in Mexico City. We were able to drive directly here to San Miguel. It was it should have been a short drive. I will tell you that in a moment. But the cost was less than a quarter tank of gas, just a few dollars in tolls, and of course, we didn't have to pay for an Airbnb in between. That means that our only expenses for this house sit really was just the food that we eat during the month that we're here and anything that we decide to do for fun. I'll start by briefly telling the story of our drive from house sit number 9 in Mexico City here to San Miguel. We expected to arrive comfortably by 7 p.m. and our host here in San Miguel had graciously offered to order pizza so we could not have any responsibilities and get to know each other our first evening here. However, our 3-hour drive turned into 12 hours. I'll note that driving in Mexico has a bad reputation with those who've never done it, but I assure you this experience was definitely not typical. And in our 14 months driving over 9,000 miles through Mexico, we've never experienced anything like this. There was just a series of car accidents, one after the other, on the busy highway between Mexico City and San Miguel. Each one of the accidents caused traffic to stop completely for an hour or more, as the cars from the busy 3-lane highway were merging into 1 lane. And the reason for this wasn't necessarily that they were really bad accidents or anything particularly awful had happened, but I suspect that it has to do with the fact that Mexican car insurance companies require the vehicles to not be moved. They need to stay exactly where the car accident happened. This is because Mexican car insurance employees will actually come to the scene, make their determination of fault at that time prior to anyone leaving the scene or the cars being moved. So once we finally got to the point where the lanes merged to 1 lane, there was a police officer blocking 2 lanes of traffic and protecting the cars in the accident, making sure that they were able to stay safely in the position of their accident until the insurance adjuster had arrived. So it was just like a series of unfortunate events, as each time we had finally broken free from the few hours of traffic jam, we would sail down the road and then head almost immediately directly into another accident's traffic jam. However, I will say that arriving in San Miguel de Allende, bleary-eyed at 2 a.m., just absolutely in shock that it had taken 12 hours instead of 3, maybe 4 hours. It was an experience that I'll never forget. After just such a long, harrowing experience, driving down the little windy cobblestone streets, going down the hill. As we got closer and closer to the centro, the streets just get narrower and narrower, and the buildings get more and more beautiful. It was an experience that I'll remember for quite some time. And fortunately, we had planned a full day of overlap before our host left for her vacation. So even though we arrived at 2 a.m. instead of 7 p.m., we still had plenty of time the whole next day to discuss the details of our house sit. Moving on to the perks of the sit, I will say the number one perk is definitely our two very friendly companions, Bella and Zoe. They were just very attentive, very friendly, especially for a cat and a little dog who was quite timid at first. Zoe is just a funny, very affectionate kitty who constantly comes up for pets and attention and spends a lot of her time trying to groom you. She has crossed pale blue eyes, which hint that she must have some Siamese in her lineage. And Bella is a little blue dog who spends her whole day sitting in her favorite spot and occasionally getting zoomies, running around and around and around, circles in the living room. And all the while, she just absolutely adores the people taking care of her, which in this instance was us. Zoe was friendly immediately and was always coming up to solicit attention. However, Bella, when she realized that the two new strangers in her home weren't leaving, she became quite suspicious. But it only took her a few days to warm up and decide that she really actually liked us too. But that's to be expected, as this was Bella's very first experience having her person leave for a month. So this was an exercise in trust, and we think she really did well considering how well she warmed up to us. Our responsibilities for the sit were, of course, the basics: food, water, and companionship. In addition to that, Bella gets 4 walks a day. She gets let out first thing in the morning, followed by breakfast. Later in the morning, she gets a full walk, followed by a snack. We get a break in the day after that, and then she gets dinner about 5 o'clock, followed by another full walk. And then right before we go to bed, sometime between 9 and 10, we take her out for another late, brief walk around the neighborhood and a bedtime snack. And every time Bella gets fed, Zoe gets a little bit of her canned cat food as well. In addition to that, Bella gets 2 half pills a day and some homeopathic drops if needed for itching. So we had to keep an eye on her itching and her anxiety levels while we were here. I briefly mentioned companionship, which was probably the most friendly, doting animals that we've experienced during our 10 solid months of house sitting. Bella was just incredibly attentive. I suspect it's her breed. I can't remember the name of her breed exactly, but she's sort of like a Shih Tzu, and I suspect that she was bred to just fall in love with her person, as she spent almost her entire day, when she wasn't relaxing on the couch, following us around and staring at us with little hearts in her eyes. Also, I already mentioned that Zoe was a very social kitty, and she would constantly be coming up for pets and sitting on our laps, and they both shared the bed with us at night. Our only other notable responsibility was watering the garden once a week, and the housekeeper, who also came once a week, watered the garden also. So the courtyard garden got. Our only other notable responsibility was watering the courtyard garden once a week, as well as some plants in front of the house. And the housekeeper also watered once a week. This is during the dry season of the year, which lasts about 6 to 9 months out of the year. So the courtyard garden and the plants in front of the house both got watered twice a week, keeping them looking lush and green. In addition to our animal companions, I would say by far the biggest perk of the sit was simply the neighborhood, the house itself, and the courtyard garden. It was all absolutely beautiful and pretty much a perfect setup. I said earlier that the house was located in the Centro Histórico section of San Miguel. However, the neighborhood itself was extremely private and quiet. It was set up in a circular road with homes full of friendly neighbors, and they all loved to stop and chat. Everyone stopped and introduced themselves. We spoke to almost all the neighbors on a fairly regular basis, as they all just adored Bella. They would stop us on walks to give Bella pets, and she would get really excited when she saw her neighbor friends. So that was a perk for us as well as a perk for Bella. The small private neighborhood actually also had its own great little restaurant, which was an interesting perk, as the entrance gate to the neighborhood actually first passed through a hotel. There was a few small apartment buildings, and then you curved around the restaurant and entered the circular drive of the neighborhood. So it was an interesting setup that really made you feel like you were part of a small community. And of course, another perk that seems to be a common thread through all of our house sits in Mexico is that we have another new friend in our host. The day that we got to spend with her prior to her leaving on her vacation, we really hit it off and had some great conversations about a variety of topics. And while she was away, we kept in pretty good contact. She was relaxing on the beach, so we didn't want to bother her too much, but we still checked in. Either I would message or she would message every few days, and it's been really wonderful getting to know her. And as with all of our hosts, I hope that we continue to maintain some form of connection in the future. Moving on to a little bit more about San Miguel itself. So our gated community entered into the hotel and the apartments, and then the circular drive of the neighborhood was very quiet, peaceful, just absolutely serene and beautiful. Just outside the gate, the bustling life of the Centro Histórico began immediately. Our neighborhood actually exited directly into the famous Mercado de Artesanías, which is a famous market. It's a massive market that consists of multiple large, busy buildings filled just wall to wall with vendors. In addition to these big buildings, there's 3 or 4 just narrow, sort of curvy alleyway blocks, and they're just absolutely stuffed with all the merchandise. Booths are overflowing with everything you can imagine. Clothes, crafts, There's notably some leatherwork from nearby Leon and Guanajuato City. There's actually a number of Oaxacan booths with hand embroidered clothes, bags, hats, shoes, tablecloths, tapestries, little tortilla warmers, all kinds of just beautiful items in all the various Oaxacan styles. A lot of the vendors had colorful glazed tiles, which are fairly plentiful in the area. The tiles are sold individually as well as handcrafted bathroom sinks, which our host had one. I really admired her bathroom. It was full of tiles. However, almost none of the tiles repeated. There was such a variety of just beautiful colors and styles that I don't actually think any tile repeated once throughout the bathroom. Of course, in addition to this, there were hand-painted treasures of all kinds, including really unique hand-painted hats and hand-painted pictures of San Miguel and the surrounding area. Also, one of the commodities that San Miguel is known for is silver. So there were all kinds of silver vendors selling jewelry, kitchen items, silverware, spoons, that sort of things, figurines, and even large silver sculptures. And one whole building of the market is devoted to food carts, a cantina with all kinds of food vendors, fresh food and vegetables, local meats, honey, sauces, and big wooden barrels filled with every flavor of homemade mole. It was like sensory overload, but in a good way. I actually could not walk the entire market in one go. It was just so much to look at, so many colors, so many products, so many vendors, just people walking between all the people and the vendors telling you about their wares and people shopping and excited that I could go through maybe one of the buildings at a time. And after that, I just had to get out and breathe for a minute because it was just so much to look at. But a number of times we walked through all the buildings on separate occasions, and we walked up and down the narrow alley, also full of vendors, on our way walking to and from the rest of the Centro area. Another interesting note about San Miguel is that ever since we moved to Mexico, more often than not, when I mention to someone here that I'm a photographer, they'll say, you have to go to San Miguel, especially when I say I'm a wedding photographer. They say all the weddings happen in San Miguel. Everyone travels there for weddings. So it sort of felt like New Orleans in that way, where people travel from all over the country and all over the world to get married in New Orleans. And it seems like they do the same here in San Miguel for obvious reasons. I was a little hesitant at first, honestly, because I've seen so many beautiful cities all throughout Mexico. I would think, well, how much more beautiful could San Miguel actually be? And it's just absolutely stunning. As soon as we arrived, it felt magical. That's about the only word that I can use to describe it. So I can definitely see the attraction. There are a high number of foreign US, Canadian, and European retirees here. A lot of them live in the Centro area. Some of them live in the more fancy, expensive neighborhoods up on the hill, and some of them live in the more rustic neighborhoods on the outskirts of the Centro. So there are a lot of foreign immigrants living here. However, it didn't really feel overloaded, either with tourists or with English speakers. There were a lot of them. particularly more than in a lot of the other parts of Mexico that we visited, especially the parts where we heard almost no English being spoken at all and had to completely rely on our Spanish, which in a way I definitely do prefer, but it wasn't as off-putting as I thought that it might be. And even though we took Bella out for 4 walks a day for our month here, the narrow cobblestone streets are just absolutely enchanting. Many of them have string lights and silver stars draped all the way down the streets as a guide to light the way up and down the cobblestone hills. So I have yet to tire of the beauty of San Miguel, and we've done a lot of walking. We've gone out for a lot of photo walks. I have a few photos to share, which you'll be seeing in this video, but I have many, many, many more that I hope to do a full expanded blog focusing only on San Miguel on my Danny Benton photography photo blog at some point in the future. And the string lights across the street really make the city just as beautiful, if not more beautiful, at night than it even is during the day, which is really something to be said. So we still have about a week here in San Miguel to enjoy our time with Bella and Zoe and the city itself. I have a feeling that it's going to really fly by, which is why I'm filming this video now instead of closer to the day that we leave. But to bring this to an end, I'd like to just say that this house sit was absolutely the perfect way to spend our last month for now in Mexico. I always say last for now because I know either we will be returning here if things don't work out in Japan, which we hope they work out in Japan, but there's always a possibility that we won't be able to obtain a business visa. We won't be able to figure out how to stay in Japan. That's always a possibility. So we're mentally prepared for coming back to Mexico either to live permanently or for regular vacations, as we've just absolutely fallen in love with Mexico during our 14 months here. The next time we touch base, we'll be on our way to Japan or already in Japan. So if you're interested in following along on our journey as we search for houses and farmland and navigate the Japanese immigration process, please feel free to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. You can also follow along on our various social media pages, Facebook and Instagram, as well as our travel journal on our website if social media isn't your thing. We also have a Buy Me a Coffee page, which is similar to a Patreon if you feel compelled to help donate to our journey, but that's never expected, no obligation, as we also just really love your comments, encouragement, and support through your friendship. We will see you in the next video.